Welcome. We are jumping into our first module of Education 688 here at McNeese State University. I'm Dr. Lori Benoit, and I will be guiding you through the course. We're going to jump in with this week's material, methods for teaching the academically gifted, and our focus this week is differentiation and teacher needs. How teachers can specifically focus on strategies they can do for differentiation and those considerations. Our two textbooks that we're going to be using for the course are provided at the bottom. They're also, of course, on your syllabus. And this week, we're focusing on Chapter 6 of the RIM work and Chapter 2 of the Weinbrenner work. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're focusing on differentiation and teacher needs, one of the most important topics, of course, in gifted education. Our goal is to dig into what it really means to differentiate instruction for gifted and high ability students in ways that are both meaningful and manageable. We're going to ground our conversation in research from the two texts. So make sure that you are not just depending, of course, on this sort of like highlight reel of the readings. Really make sure that you're grounding yourself in those readings. They are two of the leading voices in gifted education. So RIM gives us the solid understanding of grouping and differentiation, while the Brules or the Weinbrenner work offers practical strategies for compacting and adjusting instruction so our students stay challenged and engaged. So they really work hand in hand. One of the first one, the education of the gifted and talented one, is very theory heavy with some practical application strategies mentioned, whereas the teaching gifted kids in today's classrooms is very practical application heavy. So they really work hand in hand. As we go through the content, I'd like you to think about your own classroom or your teaching context. I do know that the majority of you in here are classroom teachers, but many of you are not, and you are developing those skills. So within your own observation opportunities, within your own field experience, you want to consider how you would be applying this work. Where are you already differentiating effectively, or where are you seeing that done? Where might your practice need some refinement or deeper intentionality? These reflections will directly inform all of the work that you do in the course, as well as refine your own practice in the classroom. Our learning goals this week are multifaceted. First, we'll examine the theoretical framework RIM presents around grouping and differentiation, how these structures impact both gifted and general education students. Then we'll connect those ideas to the more hands-on strategies, especially how compacting can make our instruction more efficient and purposeful. We'll also spend time reflecting on our own instructional planning, where differentiation already exists in our lessons or those that we're observing, and where it might need to be strengthened. Finally, we'll introduce Project One, which asks us to identify our own areas for growth as an educator of gifted learners. Think of this week as an opportunity to pause, take stock, and plan intentionally for how you'll refine your practice moving forward. Differentiation is the cornerstone of effective gifted education because it ensures that all students experience growth, not just those who are struggling or on grade level. For gifted learners, growth often means adjusting the pace of instruction, deepening the complexity of content, and providing opportunities for creative or higher order thinking. When we fail to differentiate, we risk disengagement, boredom, and even underachievement among our gifted students. It's not uncommon for these learners to check out when instruction feels repetitive or lacks intellectual challenge. Also, if they don't see the value in what they're doing, and when they're not provided some sort of choice with how they want to explore it, definitely we're going to see that checkout or that disengagement. They become those who are high performers will do what it takes to get the grade, but they may not be giving you their best work. Differentiation is about being intentional. We modify what students learn. So that's the content, how they learn it, the process, or how they show understanding the product. The end goal is to move every student forward from where they are, not just keep them busy or compliant. RIM's chapter reminds us that differentiation is a comprehensive framework, not just a set of isolated strategies. So it focuses on the four classic dimensions: content, process, product, and learning environment. Some of the readings that you may have had previous to this class only focus on the first three: content, process, and product, but learning environment is key, and more research are showing us how important it is specifically for gifted learners. We might adjust the content by offering advanced reading materials. We might change the process by providing independent study options. We might modify the product through creative demonstrations of learning. Or we might alter the environment by fostering collaboration and intellectual risk taking. So, how they learn the material. Pre-assessment is essential because it helps us determine what students already know so we can skip or compress unnecessary content. Too often, gifted learners spend valuable time on skills that they've already mastered. And of course, this is when that boredom sets in. Student autonomy is also key. Giving gifted learners meaningful choices in how they approach their work increases motivation and ownership. This is where they can really demonstrate that personal agency and make the learning their own. Finally, flexible pacing and compacting allows these students to move through content at a rate that matches their ability and their curiosity. So these are some things to keep in mind as we are assessing our own planning and our own lessons, and those perhaps that we observe in our gifted, if you're not a teacher of record and you have a gifted placement, how it's being implemented in that placement. Grouping, which we're going to talk about here, can be one of the most powerful or the most misunderstood strategies for meeting the needs of gifted learners. RIM emphasizes that the purpose of grouping should always be to enhance learning opportunities, not to segregate students. Cluster grouping, where several gifted students are placed in the same classroom, allows for shared learning experiences without isolating them from their peers. Flexible grouping is especially powerful because it shifts based on the skill, topic, or interest at hand, ensuring that students collaborate with different peers and avoid static labels. Temporary ability grouping, when used thoughtfully, can create space for targeted enrichment or acceleration. However, we must be cautious about tracking, which tends to become rigid and inequitable over time. The goal is fluidity, grouping based on data, need, and ongoing assessment. Now, I think it's very important here that we pause and we actually address some of the issues that you're going to see in your teaching context or your placement context. Sometimes students, because of the needs of the program, are completely removed from a setting. So we're not really talking about programmatic grouping here. That is going to be based on a district's need and on truly the amount of staffing to learners that are available to support gifted students. What we're really talking about here is grouping within the context. So, for example, your context may be that gifted learners are part of a typical regular ed classroom. Your context may be that gifted learners have a complete pull out instruction. So, for example, I know that some of you teach in contexts where you are the regular ed teacher in the room, but you have gifted students within your classroom. So consider how grouping would work in that context. Others of you may be a gifted teacher and you are in a setting where all of the students that you see are identified gifted. And so either way, you want to keep the grouping. You don't want to think of them within the context of the whole school or the whole program. You just want to keep it within the context wherever you're seeing it, whether that means 100% gifted students or whether that means gifted students who are mixed within a regular ed classroom. So either way, you want to consider the gifted needs in mind when you're grouping there. Um, there are different ways to do that. And of course, your text is going to discuss them very well, particularly the REM one does. Curriculum compacting is one of the most research supported methods for differentiating for gifted learners. So, Rules or the Weinbrenner text encourages teachers to begin with a simple step, pre assessing students before teaching a unit. If students already demonstrate mastery of key objectives, we can skip the redundant instruction and use that time more effectively. Rather than giving students more of the same, compacting replaces unneeded practice with enrichment. Deeper exploration of concepts, open-ended projects, or opportunities for creative application. This doesn't mean skipping the curriculum. It means personalizing it. It means enhancing and enriching it. Pre-assessment is critical, but so is ongoing assessment. As students move through compacted or enriched work, we continue to monitor their progress and adjust as needed. Compacting honors what students already know, and it helps maintain motivation by respecting what they have already mastered and ensuring that we honor their time and their ability in a way that is truly individualized. For example, this can be done if you are a teacher in a regular ed setting who has a gifted student or a gifted population within that regular ed room. If your pre-assessment data shows that one of your gifted students has really already mastered it, this would be a wonderful time to pull out some of those enrichment or enhancement activities. This doesn't mean that we still don't hold the student accountable for the summative assessment, and this doesn't mean that we don't continue monitoring to provide feedback on how they can refine their understanding of the content. But this means that we provide them with something that will allow them to enrich and enhance that, whether that is a different project, whether that is an independent study project. This is particularly true if you are finding that the gifted student is becoming very bored within the regular classroom. Of course, this can also be done in a setting where we have 100% gifted students. Pre-assessment still needs to be taking place and ongoing assessment still needs to be taking place because they still are going to learn at different rates. They are still going to master the content differently. Skill work such as math practice, grammar drills, reading fluency can be particularly frustrating for gifted learners if it's not differentiated. Brulis offers practical strategies to make skill instruction more responsive and engaging. One approach is adjusting the depth and complexity of skill tasks. So rather than giving gifted students extra worksheets, we can design tiered assessments that deepen conceptual understanding. For example, a student who has mastered computation might explore mathematical patterns, real-world applications, or create a tutorial for peers. Learning contracts can also be powerful. These allow students to set personal goals, choose tasks aligned to their strengths, and monitor their own progress. Choice menus give students ownership in applying skills through creative or analytical tasks. When students take the lead in how they demonstrate mastery, engagement and self-regulation soar. And this is when you see much less of that boredom. Differentiation doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of thoughtful reflection and intentional planning. As teachers, we have to consistently examine our own practice to ensure that our instructional design is aligned with the diverse needs of our learners. Ask yourself, which of my students seem disengaged because the material is too easy for him or her? Where in my lessons could I adjust the pace, add depth, or allow for student choice? How often do I intentionally group students for challenge rather than convenience, based on curiosity or interest rather than simply random grouping? This kind of reflection is what separates reactive differentiation from proactive differentiation. It's not about constantly creating new lessons, but it's about refining and adapting the lessons we already have to better meet students where they are, especially those who are ready for more. So let's take a look at a case study, this little case example. Let's look at Miss Alvarez's fifth grade class. She's a fifth grade teacher working to differentiate for a diverse group of students, from those receiving intervention support to those identified as gifted. Does this sound familiar to many of you who are either placed in the field with a gifted teacher, or perhaps you are placed in a regular ed setting and you're seeing a regular ed teacher meet the needs of all learners, including those who are gifted? Her challenge mirrors what many of us face. How do we meet the needs of all learners without doubling our workload and killing ourselves in the process? She begins by grounding her approach in two frameworks from this week's readings: Rem's emphasis on grouping and differentiation, and Brulis's or Weinbrenner's strategies for compacting and differentiating skill work. RIM reminds us that flexible grouping and pre-assessment are essential for understanding readiness, while Brulis and Weinbrenner provide the practical process for compacting, streamlining instruction for students who've already mastered the material. So by applying these principles, Ms. Alvarez creates a classroom structure where learning is responsive, it's data-driven, and dynamic rather than fixed or repetitive. So it increases the goal was increasing the challenge and engagement for those advanced learners. And of course, we want to see how that's going to flesh out. Before teaching her fractions and decimals unit, Ms. Alvarez gives a pre-assessment to determine what her students already know. 4 students demonstrate mastery of all grade level objectives, a red flag that upcoming lessons are going to be redundant for them. So using the approach of curriculum compacting, Ms. Alvarez allows these students to skip the direct instruction portion of the unit. Instead, they engage in an enrichment project titled Fractions in Real Life. Students design a problem-solving model that applies fractions and ratios to an authentic scenario, such as scaling recipes or analyzing nutritional data. They each sign learning contracts outlining their goals, timelines, and assessment criteria, encouraging autonomy and accountability. Meanwhile, Ms. Alvarez organizes flexible groups for the rest of the class based on this pre-assessment data. Some groups review foundational concepts, while others work on extension tasks. Importantly, groups are fluid. They shift as students demonstrate readiness or need additional support. This structure models both differentiation and equity. All students are engaged in meaningful work at their level, and Mrs. Alvarez uses her planning time more efficiently because she's not reteaching content to those who have already mastered it. Throughout the unit, Ms. Alvarez incorporates reflection, both for her students and herself. Students write brief reflections after each lesson, noting what challenged them and what they learned. This practice encourages metacognition and helps Mrs. Alvarez gauge, or Miss Alvarez rather, gauge how effectively her differentiation strategies are working. From her own notes, and of course her observation as she's monitoring progress, she observes that compacting the math curriculum didn't just benefit the gifted students. It improved the engagement for the entire class. The gifted learners stayed challenged, The rest received targeted instruction, and the classroom climate became more balanced. She actually had more time to work one on one with the few struggling students who had gaps in their learning. When we analyze Ms. Alvarez's approach through the lens of the NAGC Pre-K 12 programming standards, we see clear alignment. Standard 3, which is curriculum and instruction, is evident because she modified content, process, and product based on readiness and interest. Standard 5 is evident, which is the programming standard, because she implemented flexible grouping and pacing options to provide appropriate challenge and depth. Remember that the NAGC standards are going to be part of what you have to discuss for your final project. And so you want to familiarize yourself. Those are definitely provided on Canvas. And of course, a quick Google search allows you to see them as well. So these standards validate her practice and remind us that differentiation for gifted learners is not just about doing more. It's about aligning teaching with research-based evidence of what gifted students need to thrive. Ultimately, Ms. Alvarez models how small, intentional shifts, the pre-assessment, the compacting, the flexible grouping, and the reflective practice can actually transform instruction for all learners. So now let's shift to your work for the week. And you'll note that I actually put a little snip of the field experience journal here to the right. Your journal this week serves as a personal and professional mirror. I encourage you to think specifically about your current teaching context, or if you're not in a classroom right now, recall the setting where you've been placed or where you are doing your field observations. And reflect on the gifted students' needs. How are they being met, or how are they not being fully met? What aspect of your instructional planning could be more flexible or responsive? Where might you adjust differentiation, perhaps in pacing, grouping, or product options? Finally, how can your assessment practices better capture the advanced thinking of the gifted students? Be authentic and reflective here. The journal isn't just an assignment, it's a tool to help you shape your professional goals, whether you are a teacher of record or whether you are an aspiring educator, gifted educator collecting data. Your insights will connect directly to the work that you're going to do in Project 1 and, of course, your final curriculum project. So let's take a moment and actually look at that. And you'll notice that I also screenshot the first portion here. You'll need to make sure you access it on Canvas, but I screenshot the first portion of this project. Project 1 is designed to help you move from reflection to action. If you're currently teaching full-time, a teacher of record, you'll complete the Blue project, focusing on real students and real lessons from your classroom. If you're not currently teaching, you'll complete the Gold project, analyzing a mentor's lesson plan or one from your previous coursework. Both paths center around identifying 2 areas of need related to differentiation for gifted learners. You'll connect those areas to at least one of the NAGC gifted programming standards, demonstrating how your refinement aligns with national expectations for quality gifted instruction. Consider this project as both a reflection and a planning tool. The work you do here will lay the foundation for the rationale section of your final curriculum project. The NAGC standards are central to gifted education because they provide a common language and professional framework for what high-quality programming should look like. They remind us that differentiation, equity, and responsiveness are not optional. They are expectations for effective practice. When referencing these standards, don't just cite them, connect them directly to your practice. For example, Standard 3 asks us to design curriculum that is appropriately modified in content, process, and product. And of course, you would want to consider environment here as well. That might mean redesigning a reading unit so that gifted students explore author intent at a thematic or philosophical level. Standard 5 emphasizes flexible programming, grouping, pacing, and delivery methods that match students' needs. In your projects, make those links explicit. It shows that your work isn't just well intentioned, it's research aligned and standards based. To wrap up, remember that differentiation, whew, sorry, I've said that a lot this module, it's not just a one-time strategy. It's a mindset and it's a professional commitment. It asks us to anticipate learners' needs and design learning experiences that maximize the potential for all. As you move into your readings and begin your project one, I encourage you to focus on one or two specific areas where you'd like to grow. Maybe it's using pre-assessment more consistently, or perhaps it's becoming more intentional with your grouping strategies. Curriculum compacting and flexible grouping are two strategies that can yield immediate impact when implemented well. Start small and build confidence over time. Your reflection journal this week will help you clarify those goals and guide your next steps as a teacher of gifted and talented learners. I hope you have a wonderful week. Make sure that you're engaging with all materials on Canvas. And of course, let me know if you have any questions as you move through the material. Have a great time learning the material and applying it.